So what is autism? Well, basically, it's a different developmental profile. That means that individuals develop differently throughout their life than somebody who isn't autistic. They'll reach different milestones at different ages. They might mean some ahead of those who are not neurotypical, but other ones behind. Again, the milestones don't line up. Okay? Often we look at an autistic child and we think they're not meeting the stage that every other child's meeting at. But that's not a very good way. That's not an accurate way of looking at an autistic child. We often refer to something called a spiky profile. And a spiky profile means that in some ways someone may be ahead, and in other ways they may be behind at the same age. That can look confusing on the surface. That can be the child that can, be able to play the piano, for instance, but not be able to tie their own shoelaces. Normally, we think when someone's capable of doing one task, they're able to also do other simpler tasks, but that's not how it works when you develop differently. So different types of common sense as well. So what's common sense to you might not be common sense to your child or an autistic person, and what's common sense to an autistic person might not be common sense to you. I struggle with this throughout life. Things that are obvious to me, things that make perfect sense, things that are logical and rational, the rest of the world doesn't seem to get or understand or do. Quite frustrating. Developing differently often means you get a lot of messages from society that you're doing things wrong, that you're being bad, that you're constantly making mistakes. Every single day, you're getting lots of little micro corrections from those around you. No, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. Oh, this. People are shorter with you. People are more frustrated because you're getting the same things wrong again and again and again. That is actually very powerful. Not in a good way. If you're getting those constant messages from a very young age from everyone around you, in their looks, in their expression, in their tone, in the way they move towards you, in the amount of times they repeat things, that's a lot. That's a lot of messages which is saying to you, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're being bad, you're making a mistake. And that child may be trying their best. That child may be trying really hard to do the right thing, trying hard to remember the information said before. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're just led by their feelings and emotions at the moment, which may be very positive, but they're getting lots of those messages, you're being bad, you're making a mistake, you're doing it wrong. What happens when you get so many messages from society that you're being bad, you're doing things wrong, when your intentions are good? So I want you to think of that child that is playing with other children, but they're not quite waiting their turn. They're using a bit too much force when they grab or try to do a joined or shared activity. That child's intentions are good, but they're getting a lot of messages from every parent watching, from every adult that's joining in that activity, and from every child that they're being bad. So that's from everybody being quicker to turn away, to disengage, to people like grabbing the toy back, to the disapproving looks, stares, vocalizations, to people pulling them away. So many, lots of messages. That child whose intentions are the best, that you're being bad, you're doing things wrong. And that's what you often get. Being different, doing things differently, developing at a different rate than your peers. Your interactions with them are not going to be what they expect. They're not going to be what everyone else expects either. And you need to get a lot more of those messages that you're being bad, that you're being wrong. And that leads into people having a heightened sense of rejection, a heightened sense of sensitivity towards rejection sensitivity, as we call it, or sometimes the term is rejection sensitive dysphoria. In some ADHD individuals, they can lead to a more oppositional and defiant approach, which is what we call oppositional defiant disorder, which is where in response to a world which is constantly telling you you're bad from a young age when you're trying your best and your intentions are good, you can kind of turn around and go, well, I'm not going to win. No matter what I do, I'm bad. So screw the world, basically. So developing differently. So first of all, that message is you're going to get a lot more rejection in your life. You're going to get a lot more corrections. And you've got to think of the impact that that's going to have on anyone. If from a very young age, you're constantly getting messages that you're wrong, you're bad, you're doing it wrong, all the time, that's going to have profound effects on your self-esteem. That is trauma, okay? It's not the big trauma we often talk about, the capital T traumas, like being hit by a bus or being assaulted. They're the lowercase t traumas. It's not just the bullying, ostracization, it's the constant messages that society tells you. It's what we often call systemic oppression. It's the society, the conditions you grow up in oppress you. And if you're having constant messages from a young age that you're bad, you're wrong, you're doing it wrong, that's very powerful. Okay, so that's part of developing differently. So what are other parts of autism? So it is a neurological difference. If I haven't mentioned this before, you develop differently. It's to do with how your mind works. It is from birth. It's not something you develop later on. Autism is from birth, and you'll have it your entire life. How you are will be different when you're older. A lot of the challenges that we talk about, a lot of the distressed behaviours we see in autism are around young children. If you put anyone in a situation where they've got very little control, where there's a lot of unpleasant things around them, there's a lot of people misunderstanding them, telling them bad, telling them wrong, and the parents may be doing the best they can, but they cannot shield their children from those messages from society. If you're in that kind of extreme circumstance, no control, lots of unpleasant things bombarding you, I think it's kind of natural as a human to be very distressed and to, get overwhelmed. And when someone is overwhelmed and they can't escape and they have no control, what happens? We end up with things such as screaming, shouting, trying to escape, lashing out. That's quite a normal human response. We call them meltdowns. And there's the more internalized version that we call shutdowns, which is where people close off to almost protect themselves from all the unpleasant stuff outside. They're normal human reactions. They are panic attacks. They are stress responses. They are quite normal for any person. They're just more common in autistic people because we're in a world that just is not designed for our developmental profile because we're in the minority. And we're constantly getting those unpleasant messages. You're not meeting this milestone. You're not doing this right. And we're put in situations which are unpleasant for us, like a school situation in a classroom with 30 other pupils when you don't have the same level of understanding. You're not actually at the same mental age, if you will, in those areas. And so, I don't know, let's say you've got a bunch of 5-year-olds or a bunch of 7-year-olds and you put a 3-year-old in there. I don't know. That's not, and the 3-year-old is expected to do the 7-year-old things. That's going to cause some conflict. And at the same time, autistic people often have sensory sensitivities, differences in how they process sensory information. Can be a great advantage. In some situations, being oversensitive to sound means you can hear things that other people can't, or you can smell things that other people can't. Great for certain things that we do as humans. In our evolutionary history, oversensitive to sound means you can hear the sheep are being attacked from far away if there's a wolf approaching. Sensitivity to sight or to smell means you can tell if something is ripe or edible or in season. Great advantages. However, nowadays we don't grow up in the same circumstances we did in the past. We're in busy cities, chaotic environments, so many sensory things bombarding us. You walk down the street, you're smelling, 50 different foods, hundreds of different people, so much information going on. Autistic people, that's an insane amount of information. It's very overwhelming. So if you put someone again in a school environment where there's so much sensory information bombarding them, what's going to happen? Overwhelmed, with meltdowns, shutdowns, and trauma. Lots and lots more trauma, which is a barrier to future learning. And the thing with trauma is it often makes us more vigilant to sensory stimuli. And then, not only did we originally have a sensitivity to a certain sense, now we've got trauma around it, which makes it feel more jarring, feel more unpleasant, feel painful. I hope you start to realise now, I've mentioned trauma twice already. A lot of the things we're talking about here are actually trauma, sadly. So, again, we've mentioned that autism is a neurological difference. It is lifelong. It is also invisible. There's this idea across time that, you don't look autistic. It's something that's often said to us. There is no look of autism. Do I look autistic here? Perhaps to you I do. Perhaps you have the ability to notice. I notice certain people out and about. I can go, they are autistic, I can tell. There are some differences in how autistic people, not look, but maybe interact. There's the idiosyncrasies, the things we miss in conversation. We often have differences in gait due to differences in sensory processing around proprioception and our vestibular senses. I've made videos on them. Please check them out. That means maybe we stand differently, or we stand a bit too close or too far. There's those differences which may mean to you you're more likely to notice, but in general you can't notice. The autistic people are everywhere. What we used to think it was less than 1%, and now we think it's over 5% of the population. The autistic people are the people that do your accounts. They're the people that serve you ice cream. They're the people that stack shelves. We're the people that come and do your plumbing. We're the people that are doctors. Pretty much anything and everything. Social or not social. There's a lot of myths, unfortunately, about autistic people. But basically, it is invisible. It's not something you can tell just by looking at someone. It's an invisible condition. And again, when something is invisible, we end up with the same situations as I just mentioned. If people can't tell that you've developed differently, that you have a spiky profile, that you may not understand things in the same way, and they communicate with you in a way that doesn't work for you, they're going to give you a lot more negative face expressions, negative body languages, messages that you're doing it wrong, that you're bad, there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with you, you're weird, you're strange, you're unusual. Again, imagine that in conversation. Imagine that's part of your everyday life. Imagine if you had that as a layer on top of your every interaction. That's your past experience. That's your experience into adulthood. Would you be better or worse at interpreting others' emotions? If you're constantly getting those messages from a young age, would you feel comfortable? Would you feel safe with other people's emotions? Would you be more likely to interpret other people's emotions as negative if you've got a lot more negative, messages off people? Again, we talk about autistic people being bad at recognizing others' minds and others' feelings. There's trauma in that mix, okay? There may be some autistic people that really, really struggle with recognizing others' minds, but part of understanding others' minds, part of interpreting others' emotions in a moment is a feedback we get from a younger age. It's seeing other people's response to our actions. That's how we determine if we're good or if we're bad. If you act in a certain way and your parent responds to you positively, I've done a good thing, I'm a good person, young child. If we're getting messages that you're being bad, you're doing things wrong, profound effect, trauma. Going to make it harder to interpret your emotions. Now also, if you are different, you have different sensory perceptions, and you develop differently emotionally from a young age, the develop is different, then you're also getting a lot of messages off society that how you feel is invalid. To explain what I mean by this, anything that we as humans don't understand, some of us are more curious about. We're like, oh, how does that work? What does that mean? But also, some things we are quicker to dismiss. Oh, that doesn't make sense, or that sounds ridiculous, or you just have to do it anyway. As a result, autistic children often get those messages. When they feel in a certain way, others don't understand, their emotions are dismissed, invalidated, put down. Your emotions are not okay. That's the message. Your emotions are not normal. Your emotions are not real, not a thing. You must ignore them and move on. That's a profound message to send a young, developing mind. And if you think by the time somebody gets into adulthood, they've had so many of those messages that they don't trust their own emotions. They maybe have turned away and don't understand what's going on for them. They haven't spent the time to look at, to feel, to explore those emotions, and to feel it's okay to feel that way. Would you have more difficulty recognizing your emotions? Would you have more difficulty expressing your emotions if that had been your journey? Would you have more difficulty in recognizing emotions in others if you'd always been taught to dismiss your own emotions and that your own emotions are invalidated? Because part of understanding another's emotions is understanding yourself. Again, trauma to understanding yourself, your own emotions, you're invalidated. Who you are is not okay. Who you are is invalid. It is wrong, it is bad to feel that way, it is bad to be you. That is a profound message to get from a young age. And if you've had that from a young age, imagine how you're going to be as an adult. Hey? That's why I see a lot of people as adults, rather than their problems being to do with autism, it's to do with trauma. It's to do with those constant traumas from a young age. We might call some of these things microaggressions. Okay, the constant invalidation, how you feel is wrong, there's something wrong with you constantly. There's plenty of other microaggressions I get. It's so good you're here. Oh, you're so brave. Oh, it's so good to have someone like you. Really annoying. Yet another reason you don't necessarily want to be out as autistic. All of the misunderstandings. So again, autism is also incredibly varied. So, there's not one expression of autism. There's not one expression of you, of a neurotypical person or predominant neurotype or whatever the current term is. There's not one of you. Every human is diverse. And when we're talking about autism, we're talking about normal humans. Okay, we develop differently, but as a result from that, we get a lot more trauma by society that doesn't understand, that doesn't accept. And that leads on to mental ill health. And that's a part of why autistic people often look quite varied, because we often have different levels of mental health, and that is anxiety. It is not a part of autism. Anxiety is a part of growing up in a sensory bombarding world, and a world where you're traumatized almost straight away. That causes anxiety, that causes depression, common co-occurring conditions in autism. Also another common co-occurring condition, anxiety disorders, specific anxiety disorders, more common in autism. Are these an all part of autism? No, they're trauma. We do have different things which come alongside it. All of us do. All of us have different health conditions, pain conditions. All of our minds work differently. These are all normal, humans, just us being humans. And, it means our minds work differently. We've just categorized them a bit more. But really, it's all just normal human behavior. And as a result of having individual personalities, I know, right? We are quite diverse. So autism is not one thing. It's why we call it a spectrum. Okay, different people have different levels of social understanding. Different people have had different lives. Different people have, I don't know. Some people have different toys. Some people have different ways that parents talk to them. Some people have different teachers. Some people have different experiences of going to hospitals or talking to professionals. All of these affect how we interact with the world, what situations we feel anxiety and what situations we are triggered by due to trauma. And that affects our ability to interpret emotions, to understand others, to understand ourselves, to empathize, pretty much everything. And if you can see from everything I've described already, autistic people have already entered this world or engaged or entered adulthood with a major, significant, massive disadvantage. Autism is also clinically defined as a disability. So everything you hear and see about autism is there's something wrong with you. It's a disability, okay? There is something wrong with your mind. What's happened with your mind is a disability. It is a disease. It is a condition. It is not you, who you are. Who you are is invalid, okay? Who you are is a problem. Can we cure it? Okay, is there a cure? Let's grieve for your child. Those messages, horrific. Just add to the layer. Imagine that. In an adulthood, I'm an adult, and I know the situation of walking by somebody even in a club and hearing them say autistic people should all be in homes, in hospitals, in institutions. Okay, the messages that you can't hold a job, you're not going to ever have a girlfriend or a life or live independently. All those normal human things. No, not for you. There's something seriously wrong with you, and you belong locked away with lots of specialist treatment. So many of my friends, so many people around me, that's the messages that they were told when they got their diagnosis or when they were young. Imagine that. That's horrific. Imagine growing up life with feeling like there's no hope. There's no hope of you being independent. Everyone's seeing you as incapable because you don't understand the same things as them, because you've got so much trauma already that when you navigate through the world, you're going to be expressing that trauma. And to other people, that's going to seem incredibly unhealthy, and it's going to seem even more like there's something wrong with you. There's a layer on that. You got trauma. You act in certain ways because of your trauma. It reinforces everything. This is nowadays where we talk about the social model. Okay, what that means is autism plus the environment equals someone's expression, their outcome, how they navigate through life. Autism in itself, normal part. We're just normal humans. But if you develop in an environment that is not loving, not supporting, not validating, then you are going to end up traumatized. That's quite simple. And please don't think I'm saying parents here. Every single parent I meet is trying their hard to push against the society and the system, which is traumatizing their children. It is horrific for parents of autistic children. They get so many negative messages that they're wrong, that they're bad. The past messages from the past is you're frigid, or you're a refrigerator mother, you're cold, you're unfeeling, you're disciplining your child wrong. Autistic parents' children also get a ton of trauma. Okay, tons of trauma by society. It's horrible. It really is horrible. So, autism, it's a different developmental profile. We will reach different milestones at different ages. And because we cannot separate autism from a very unpleasant and chaotic environment that's not suited from us, that means there is trauma as well. And trauma will affect someone reaching someone's milestones. It will affect their ability to recognize themselves and their own emotions. We think if you're told from a young age, you're wrong, you're invalid for being who you are, what happens is we leave a lot of people end up socially masking, where you act in ways to appear normal, to fit in. You suppress yourself, you suppress your identity, you push your identity to the side, you act. You make yourself make eye contact. Again, if you're getting so many negative expressions of someone from a young age, so many corrections, so many messages that you're bad, would you find eye contact to be more about attention or more threat? Because eye contact is threat. For most of the animal kingdom, it's threat. Okay, and if you've got all those negative messages from a young age, will you find eye contact more scary? It's more likely to be negative. Okay, so you're forcing yourself to make eye contact. You're forcing yourself to smile, nod along, to say the things other people are going to be interested in, not yourself. You're masking. You're spending all that time ruminating about what to say in a situation, what you might have done wrong. That's masking. That's profound. That's what you're taught. That's what all autistic people, most of us go through. Every human masks. Masking can be beneficial, but when you're constantly taught to suppress your identity and how you feel is invalid and who you are is invalid, masking is so damaging. Just imagine that. You spend all your time trying to be something you're not because who you are is fundamentally bad. Wow. Trauma. Trauma, massive trauma. You wonder why so many of us have mental health. The thing is, we get told it's because we're autistic. It's not. It's because of society. Do you know what? Every parent, I meet so many parents that are trying the hardest. I meet so many healthcare professionals that are trying the hardest. It's just I don't know how else to say it. It's a very messed up world. I would love to think more positively about that. What other messages do we get by society? You're incapable. You lack capacity. I could just keep on layering this on and on and on. So yeah, what is autism? Generally, we talk about autism is you have differences in social interaction and communication. You have restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Think about that last one. Last one, restricted, repetitive. You have a specialised mind. That's something that I often hear. You have a specialised mind. Well, in our past, we'd all have specialised minds. Whether it be the blacksmith, the farmer, the shepherd, whatever it was. Perhaps they're bad examples, but we'll all be quite specialist. Now in modern society, we have to be generalists. We have to manage so many different things. In the past, we'd grow up in smaller communities with less people. We'd understand their minds. We'd get a lot more We're told that autism is a disability that focuses around differences in social communication interaction, that we have repetitive and restrictive behaviours, and we have sensory processing disorder. Very negative terms. That's what you're taught. I'm telling you here now that it's not true. Okay? Social communication interactions, there are some patterns to them, sure. A lot of them are in younger childhood. A lot of them have trauma in the mix, and you can't ignore those things. Okay? When we talk about restricted and repetitive interests, we all have interests. Okay? Autistic people are more specialists. We all used to be more specialists. Okay? And if the rest of the world is very negative to you, you might take more joy in getting lost in some specialized preferred subject that feels safe, that is consistent when everything else is inconsistent around you. Something that's in your control, something that brings you joy when the rest of the world puts you down. Okay? And sensory processing differences, part of those may be your natural state. You are more sensitive to something. You notice something, that's an advantage. But in this world, you're bombarded. And when you layer trauma on the top of that, you lead to hypervigilance, people finding pain in those sensory things, people's brains focusing in on those sensory things because they're expecting danger. We as a society fundamentally misunderstand what autism is. And we as a society traumatize young autistic and adult autistic people every single day. It's no wonder that a lot of autistic people don't want to seek out friendships, they don't want to seek out support or advice, that have such extreme distressed behaviours such as meltdowns, lashing out, kicking out, screaming, that end up closing into themselves in shutdowns because they just can't take it anymore, that have so much mental ill health, end up with such higher rates of suicidality. It's 8 to 9 times higher in the autistic population. It's insane. We need to do better. We need to do a lot better. You need to teach autistic people that their emotions are valid. Even if you do not understand where they're coming from, it's okay to feel that way. That means listening to autistic people when they describe their emotions, when they express their pain, when they talk about their desires, listening to them. It means listening to them when they say they're in pain or they're distressed. It means making reasonable adjustments and adaptations. Would you act these ways towards an adult? Because what are children if not little adults? What are adults if not little children? We need to do a lot differently. And until we do that, we're just going to cause more and more trauma every day.